Hey guys, I'm Cicilla Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here to review the movie Leave the World Behind. If you end up enjoying this full movie review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out small YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server, where you can join, collab, and chill all your content as well for free, and shilling will be reminded at the end of the review. With all that out of the way, let's get into Leave the World Behind. Now, I've seen the trailer for this movie about 3 or 4 times before being like, okay, and then going to see it. And I was genuinely curious about what this movie was going to entail, about what I kind of had a inkling that this was sort of going to be a sort of type of apocalyptic type of entry movie, so I was relatively intrigued about the process of which that would go about. So, with that, we begin with the world in a relatively, average state, so, everything's all fine and dandy. And we have our family of four. We have Amanda, the wife, and Clay, the husband, and the 2 kids, the older brother and the younger daughter, in which they go up and they're going to essentially build a house in which to have their vacation, to just get away from the city. Okay, so they do that, and she's realizing, the Amanda is that she's not a particular fan of people, in a very broad but vague sense of it's sort of like that generalization thing that people kind of tend to do when they're trying to espouse certain beliefs. They tend to more aptly try to be like, well, it's probably broadly true that the stereotype is closer to the truth than a falsehood. It's sort of the attitude she seems to be beholden to towards other people besides her family. The husband seems to be relatively in the know-how of tech, and holds a pretty basic job from what I can understand of his job. I think he's like a teacher or something. But outside of that, he, as we will see later on, doesn't really hold any current know-how of kind of how to go about things as the world begins to shift. But we'll get more into that later on. Anyway, and apologies if I keep looking away. My notes are on a different laptop here, but anyway. So they go, and once they arrive, it's not too long after that the first 2 things that are removed from the equation is access to the internet and access to technology or TV in general. That seems to be the 2 initial things that seem to be going on the wayside. Now, they kind of stray it to, they think there's just a temporary blackout. So they don't think too much of what that could possibly mean as of right now, anyway. So, later on, we get a visitor by the name of George, and apparently this guy is the proper owner of the house. And Amanda doesn't initially believe him at first, and she tries to prevent or assert her case as to why she believes that. and he uh, is trying to be like, hey, me and my daughter are back. Uh, so, things are a little bit complicated. I mean, you already are here, so they try to say, like, oh, we'll work something out, essentially. We'll give you, like, a partial refund if you, feel inclined to leave or whatever. Um, so the wife holds on to these beliefs herself, uh, sort of, again, kind of giving into that more negative inclination towards other people, as we've already previously sort of established. Um, so the daughter turns on the television to briefly see that there is a emergency broadcast thing that is happening among all the channels now. So now that they know that at least something is going on. Now, I don't remember if I put this in my notes. Yeah, I don't remember where this happens, but like it's like in between here somewhere where like they head to like the beach and then like they see the incoming oil tanker, and then it like keeps moving towards the beach, and then it finally collides into the beach, and people are like freaking out and recording, as people tend to do, well, once avoiding an actual catastrophe from happening. Um, so that happens somewhere, but I didn't write it in my notes. I do apologize. I just remember that distinctly happening. Anyway, this movie dissects its parts. So it has a part 2 called The Curve. Here, we get a little bit of an update. Apparently, or at least according to the news in the movie, apparently that this attack that is happening is done by hackers. And this seems to be the prevailing theory throughout the movie, that they're hackers. I mean, not in the U.S. They seem to suggest that they're coming from outside the U.S. and they don't really name like one particularly. Like, this is the country. They're like, they're generalizing. It could be China. It could be, the poster was from like some other like some like state or area I'm not too familiar with, honestly. But point being is that like they keep like being like, oh, it could be this, it could be that. It's essentially left into the world of theorization of what uh, is causing this issue to occur. Meanwhile, the husband is getting ready to head out to see if he can finally find out what's going on, heading toward the city. Meanwhile, the younger daughter sees like these like 100 or so deer, starting to like move in fearlessly towards her. This seems to be something that actually comes back up later in the movie, but for the time being, it does seem like no one believes her at the current juncture. Um, when she describes it, at least to her brother, she doesn't seem to say anything to the parents or whatever. And admittedly, when I was thinking about her writing, I was like, is this like M. Night Shyamalan's writing? Because it almost feels like his writing a little bit. And again, I'm not really sure, but it does come across as that type of writing, where it's very, or the information or what you're given about a character it's sort of like this one sort of like quirk instead of like a fully fleshed character. Like, her whole shtick in the movie, as far as I can recall, is she is obsessed with the show Friends for whatever reason. Now, I've never personally watched Friends, so I wouldn't know whether that's a good show or not, but regardless, that seems to be like her obsessed show. Now, granted, like, yeah, I can understand people having that show that they're like into, but like, I don't know, you could I think you could flesh her out beyond that a little bit, right? Um anyway. So uh bu- 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 so George begins to now suss out what Amanda has been saying about this whole hacker thing going on. So he decides that he's going to head over to the neighbor's house and see what's going on over there. Uh, we see that, again, that on the radio, because we cut to Clay, his travels, we see that when he's out of the car, that again, it seems to be an inclination that the hackers are still like the sort of prime suspect of like what is happening here. Um, bu- 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 bu. Meanwhile, the two young siblings, the older brother and the younger sister, go check out her inclination about the deer, but that kind of goes into a whole different thing a little bit later. Meanwhile, while Clay is driving, he sees a lone Hispanic woman that seems to be uh, saying something and like something about her home or like or like what her situation very well might have been. Well, perhaps even similar to their situation, but he doesn't seem to understand or doesn't clearly understand anything she's saying. So he sort of just leaves her behind, not knowing really what to do in that juncture. Once he sees. Now, when I first saw the scene, I thought it was a helicopter that was like dropping like these flyers, but apparently he called it a drone later on in the movie. And they drop all of these red. And at first, when it was at a distance, it looked like smoke. It looked like they were dropping red smoke, but apparently they were dropping several red flyers. Uh, that again seemed to insist that there was an attack that was happening. Again, kind of keep alluding to that by whatever means necessary. It seems to be rather consistent but still vague as to who is that party that is doing this. It seems to be throughout the entire movie. Um, ba, 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 ba. Meanwhile, we see that Clay makes his way towards like the beach side of the household, and he sees several dead bodies from a plane crash or some sort of crash. And as he's moving or looking from side to side at the very most, he sees an incoming plane hurtling downward towards him. So he tries, and he barely escapes, running past a doorway, and then the glass like shatters like past the windows. Um, so we see that the daughter, I believe her name is Rose, like, at least that's what I put in my notes anyway. The younger daughter of Amanda, anyway, also sees a flock of birds migrating towards a location. Again, keeping with the animal flocking theme seemingly throughout the movie as well. So we see George, or I just, in my notes, I just called him G, because he does, like, shorten his name throughout the movie. Anyway, so George returns back to the house, and they begin to hear a strange noise. And it begins to ring throughout the entire area, and everyone seems to be agitated. And it goes into, well, part 3 being, well, the noise. So here we see that Amanda is beginning to freak out. And Ruth, that being George's daughter, um, she's kind of freaking out as well at this point, based on what's going on. Or more and more so, and he's the one who's trying to keep his calm to, guide her through whatever this is. So he talks about how he knew this guy named Danny, who clearly Amanda was referencing later on here in my notes, and how he probably knew something was happening, and then how he was preparing for something to happen. So the family, after their discussions here, the family of 4 begin to head out. They feel like they're gonna do better outside of this place they've been granted via temporary status, whatever. And they end up on the highway, where they see several cars that are automated, like stockpiled, crashed, one backed to another, and another comes crashing into them, and then there are several more that actually keep coming more into them as well. So, I mean, they could have easily just avoided it by driving off the road, but whatever. They were trying to make it way more cinematic by having them keep to the road, but whatever. So the daughter hears the sirens, and after their kerfuffle from all the cars, they decide to return to the house, being like, yeah, we're probably not even going to get that far, actually, turns out. So, part 4, Amanda finally suggests that they try to find a bunker in the city, more or less, essentially. We see that the older brother has gotten a fascination with Ruth. Let's just leave it at that. Getting turned on all that hormones and young youth falling in love, and all that. Anyway, so they do like a swap, essentially, where like Clay is hanging out with Ruth, and then Amanda is hanging out with George. And Amanda and George are talking about how she keeps going about how people never truly change, or again, in that keeping to what her belief was, is that, again, and using those broad strokes, being like, people in general just are assholes, we're all just mainly assholes, we barely change over time, all that stuff. And he kind of goes on about how his friends were talking about this evil cabal, and how he kind of puts a serious sort of notation to this idea, and she's like, "Oh, are you serious? Like, do you think that's what's really going on?" He's like, probably not." He kind of downplays it after the fact. But even they begin to see the animals begin to flock. A bunch of flamingos enter the pool. I believe the two outside, which would be Clay and Ruth, I think are the ones that see that. I think, if I remember correctly. Meanwhile, Amanda and George just start dancing, and they're like, are we establishing feelings for each other? We were both married. Oh, this is wrong." Things are starting to get in a little on that end, too. Um, and then the noise returns, and then they're like, "Oh, fuck." So we see Rose talking about that being the younger daughter, Amanda. We hear her talking about a story that she heard, and this is like a parable, I think that's what they call it, of a man who would pray to God, and he's like in this like disaster, and he has like several chances to be saved by several different people, and then he's like, "Oh no, God will save me, God will save me, God will save me," over and over again, and then he dies. And then he complains to God, being like, "God, why didn't you do anything?" And then, she ends the story essentially saying, "God provided you with all of these, like, things, and you didn't take any of them," essentially. And, that to me is very interesting, because I do think that is actually simultaneously both a knock and a praise of religion at the same time, in a weird way. I know it's a weird thing to say, but I always found that parable like a duality of religion. Um, there is this sort of fascination about, giving it too much to, God, in the sense of like, if there is what you would refer to as a sign, if you're not willing to take anything, I mean, would you really have any right to complain? I mean, there is sort of that sort of blindness to it, and that sort of is the criticism end of the end part of it. And I think when you hear God's response, I think that's the praise of religion. It's like, yeah, God, if you're someone who believes in God, like, he would give you these signs, as it were, and he would provide in ways that you may not even think about. If you're just thinking like, "Oh, well, God will strictly save me in in a almost miracle, like, it'll just sort of happen sort of way, instead of like, in accordance to what's happening in the world, essentially." So I thought that was a decent parable to bring into this story, because I do think that there are both ends of the spectrum can be discussed in that discussion, and that's coming from someone who was previously religious and not as religious anymore. Just to throw that out there, I guess. Anyway, point being is that we move on. Well, excuse me. So even she is beginning, the younger daughter is like, "I don't know if I trust these people now." She's kind of getting it from her mom, I guess. Um, or I think I meant to write Ruth. Yeah, Ruth is the one. Actually, never mind. I remember this now. Ruth is the one, the other daughter, the slightly older one, of George. She's the one who's like, "I don't trust this family now. They came into our house, and she kind of establishes like all of their weird, bizarre quirks. She even's like, "Yeah, I knew that guy was like totally into me." The dad's like feels like a pervy kind of guy, but wouldn't act on it. The mom's very prickly. The daughter seems super obsessed with this thing. It's like, yeah. So even she's sort of now reflecting back on those comments that Amanda has been making throughout the entire movie. Meanwhile, the older son, whose name I actually just wrote down in my notes, so his name is Archie, he begins to pull out his teeth, and I think this is sort of bizarrely established. At some point, he gets like a bug bite, and I guess that like they tangentially relate it to like why he's pulling out his teeth later on in the movie. And then begins to puke. So they're like, "Uh-oh, we need to help him out." So George feels now obligated to help them back out. So he's like, "All right, you got to give me an hour." Meanwhile, Rose goes missing for the rest of the movie, until the very, very end of it. That is. Which we're actually getting pretty close to, so it's not a long process, but And Amanda keeps going on about how awful people are, so not anything new coming out of the equation. But I think she does come to some sort of realization here. I didn't write it, but she does say that I do miss them, though, essentially. So anyway, George and Clay bring the son over to Danny, the guy we saw, the stockpiler guy earlier. Tensions begin to rise as he is trying to defend his own daughter. And he has a shotgun, so this is like in the trailer, which is like near the end of the movie, but like they're like holding each other up. The father, the one that we've been following, Clay, manages to at the end pretty much convince this Danny guy to kind of go back to the code of, I guess, capitalism, despite this being a apocalyptic world, and they do that trade. Meanwhile, we see that Amanda and Ruth get hoarded by the group of deer, so they're like trying to freak him out, get him to run. And so we're like cutting back and forth between these groups, by the way, throughout this ending section. The guns are getting raised and tensions are rising throughout this like back and forth. Like we see them, the deer group trying to scare off the deer, as I mentioned. This is another instance where we see someone mention how the animals that have been sort of, hoarding in as sort of a warning mechanism. They say that earlier in the movie as well. Meanwhile, as Amanda and Ruth are now continuously looking for Amanda's daughter, they see from where they are, which is like an opening in the forest area, they can see into the city, and they see this mass explosion and then another like mass explosion, and they just sort of are in awe of this complete collapse, and they hold each other's hands as this chaos is sort of unveiling. And George is sort of describing how this sort of terrorist group would go about doing this about like how they would go after the technology first, that being like the sort of core aspect of like how we commune, how we make money and do most of what we do today is based on technology. So he essentially says is that that's what they would attack first, and then essentially from that point moving forward, it would sort of collapse within itself. That people from that point moving forward would sort of cannibalize each other, not in a literal sense, but more in a figurative sense, um, at least behaviorally speaking. Um, so as that's going on, we cut back to the daughter, who's like in this separate building, or she found a separate house that we saw them like her eyeing earlier in the movie. So she decided to just say, you know what, I'm just gonna go over there. Fuck it. This house is, for whatever reason, I'm a little baffled by this. It's empty. Like, she's the only one who's in here, and this building has a bunker in it. So I'm even more puzzled as to why that building in particular would be abandoned. Like, why wouldn't there be people there already in the bunker? That's just, I don't know. So anyway, she ends up down there first, and then she sees like a list or like a wall of like all these television shows, and she finds the one that she has been obsessed with, and she was like right on the final episode of it, so she's like, oh well, I'm just gonna watch the DVD of I think the show is Friends. And the movie ends with her beginning to watch the last episode, and that's it. Like, that's where the movie ends. And I will say that is a bizarre place to end the movie, where like you still have like Amanda and Ruth outside. I mean, they weren't too terribly far away from where she is. They saw the building, or at least Amanda did. So, assumably, like after whatever amount of time they spent, sort of realization of like, our cities like collapsing, they would probably actually begin to head over there. But for the other group, I'm not entirely sure how they would have ended up there. That being like Clay and the guys, they kind of they were still pretty far away from what I could tell space-wise from that location. I mean, they just got done from doing the deal, so I mean, I think they end at the house essentially, like at the house where we were sort of focused on, and then so I'm not sure how they find the bunker. I mean, unless like Amanda goes all the way back to get them and be like, "Hey, there's a bunker here," I suppose that could happen. Like, I'm not saying that's out of the realm of possibility, but it is a bizarre ending point. I will point that out much. So yeah, that was Leave the World Behind, and I do think that there are some interesting, like, moments in this movie, like the whole philosophical religious thing about the end of the world, and about whether you're having that person who broadly hates people in that sort of way, like I think they could have delved a little bit more into that in particular. I suppose like there are little bits and pieces I think that are definitely missing from her perspective. Like, she just kind of cuts into like, oh well, I actually do miss them though, sort of this interesting realization without like any sort of meat to it. It's just sort of always this like this constant recognition that she just hates everybody, or the majority of people. And again, from a behavioral standpoint, seems to be her consistent thing. Clay, as I mentioned, is not too terribly interesting. I wish they gave him a little bit more of a perspective on things, but he just seems to be like the guy who's like the most lost in all of this. Like, he seems like without, what they have, things are just going to be lost, and like he can't seem to like almost properly function without it. George definitely brings that a little bit more of an interesting, I suppose, perspective with the whole thing with his wife, and sort of keeping on with the theories, but trying to maintain this level of like, hope, I suppose, despite what negative things are like being thrown at you at a quite fast pace, to be quite frank. I think those two are very interesting in that way. Like I said, the younger daughter, seems to be fairly simplistic. Like I said, the most interesting thing that she brings up is that parable, as I mentioned. Outside of that, she kind of is just a girl obsessed with a show. And like she does like at least say why she likes the show. Like, yeah, it's sort of like kind of going off of the idea of like escapism in a general sort of way. Like, she says like, yeah, but I can, they feel real to me, sort of thing, is kind of what she goes about saying at some point in the movie. I forget where, but the son is also kind of boring, if I'm being honest. I mean, if anything, the whole bizarre bit where he just starts losing his teeth, like, I was like, I'm not really sure what they're doing with this character. Yeah, I think, like, and he was kind of, like, also just being a jerk to the sister, like, pretty much thought, what, so I guess, they're doing the whole, like, base sibling thing. It's like, yeah, I guess you can do the stereotype of siblings, yada yada yada. I know what that's like, having two siblings. But it's like, there does come a time, especially within crises moments like this, where like that part of you would go away, and you would, like, I don't know, actually like show how much you care about your siblings. Like, there's sort of like this bizarre camaraderie that sort of envelops when you have the time to do as such, that just feels like it never really goes away at any point in the movie. And it just feels like there's like this, again, this missed opportunity. And there does feel like there's like a handful of missed opportunities in this movie, with its ending in particular, and with some of the character moments as well. Not, again, just not having that defining, like, this is what this character is bringing. Like, they're bringing this, sort of very clear landscape view of how they view the world, very much like Amanda does throughout the movie. Again, it's a rather simplistic view, but at least it's clear what her view is. So at least we're going like, okay, so at least I understand why she behaves in the way that she does. At least there's something there to be like, okay, that's grounded in something. Whereas, again, some other characters, like, again, the husband, it's just like, I'm not really sure what his sort of, like, thing is, like, solidly what it is, But, yeah, in terms of a score, I think I'd probably give this movie, like, a 5 or a 6 out of 10, if I'm being as objective as possible. Like I said, I think that there are quite a few things that I think that this script could have added to really hit on these whether they're sort of these larger themes about like what it means that the world is ending, and perspectives on like what people bring into that, when there are people left to bring that sort of their perspectives to, if there would be there would be people that would have to change because there are more people adept to technology. There's probably still some old school people in the world. Like I'm confident in saying that still. Like sure, and they bring their perspectives, and they probably be well suited to like adapting to go kind of moving in a backwards direction, in that sense of like there's more outdoorsy people as well, again, that could despite what's happening with technology, they're probably the most adept, if anything, to being a part of a shifting world that is being removed from technology. There's definitely different avenues you can kind of think about. So it is kind of a little bit of a shame that there's so very few perspectives that are being sort of explored here, that are very focused, and have a sort of a definitive conclusion, instead of asking like, that's really where they're concluding it, despite all those other things that didn't even feel like those threads were ending. Like, it feels like her thread ended, like she found the bunker, but like everyone else's thread, it doesn't feel like anyone else's thread ended because no one else got there. Essentially, is what I'm getting to at that for that example. But anyway, so yeah, I think that this movie needed a different or a tightening up of the script, definitely, in terms of what characters we were following. Because again, like when they do bring up that stuff, like the comparisons or the parables, or and how they feel about the situation and how they go about it, those are the sort of core elements of like, yeah, I mean, people would probably talk about that stuff, and it's sort of like it's the connecting thread to like it's only going to make the world feel more either horrific or whatever kind of vibe you're trying to go for. I mean, it does seem like the ending seemingly is like, but there is that sliver of hope, so at least again for her, and maybe the other two ladies, I don't know. But anyway, that is my review of the world. Leave the World Behind. And if you ended up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. Why don't head over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly, and fourth to my Discord server, where you can join, collab, and chill, and do all that cool stuff. And until next time, everybody, bye-bye!